Well, this is going to be a tough one. Welcome back to In the Defense of, a show where I look at some less than popular fighting game characters and try my best to explain why I think they deserve more love. For the second episode of this series, I'm going to somehow try and get across why Street Fighter 3's Remy is actually more than the hypocritical edgelord he appears to be. You know what? I'll be honest, I used to hate Remy too at one point. When I first played Third Strike and looked around the roster, he was one of the few characters that just never jumped out to me. He seemed to me like he just never fit in with the rest of the cast, as if he was some outsider that stood in the pouring rain while the rest of the roster partied inside. In terms of gameplay, he appeared to just be a function for Gal's moveset, except not as well rounded thanks to the addition of parries in Street Fighter 3 that made Remy's sonic boom-like projectiles effectively useless. Sure, he looked flashy, but outside of his moody animations, and boy there were a few of those, there was nothing that pulled me in. Even when it came to the story, which you'll know by now is more my thing, Remy seemed like a completely random addition. He had no affiliation to any storyline, he wasn't involved with Gil in the Secret Society, nor did he have an established link or grudge with any particular character. Not to say he had to have any of those things in order to justify his inclusion, but it just seemed odd. His motivations are often the most mocked aspect of his character, and for good reason. Remy bears a hatred of fighters after his father abandoned him and his dying sister, so Remy tries to get his revenge by becoming a fighter? It didn't really make any sense back in 1999, and it doesn't really make any sense now. Even in his own arcade ending, he seems to rush through a large amount of character development, and then walks towards a bizarrely placed light, before the game just calls it a day and ends. Just like other aspects of Remy, his ending seems like a mere afterthought. For all intents and purposes, it feels like Remy was thrown into the game at the last second to fill a roster slot, and had all the effort and planning of a character that was rushed during the final stages of production. And well, that's actually the case. In a 1999 pre-release interview with the Japanese magazine Gamest, Capcom developers sat down and went through the development of Third Strike, where they revealed several details about Remy's development, including the fact that he was the last character created for the game. Now, this isn't really a shocking revelation for the reasons I stated earlier, because Remy feels like a character with less planning than others. That's not to say he's a broken or unfinished character, because he's not, but just that he clearly had less time spent on fine-tuning who he was compared to the rest of the game's roster. In fact, it's also revealed in the same interview that they didn't even start making Remy until well after the rest of the roster had been completed. We also wanted to flesh out the backstory of SF3 with Remy. He was the last of the new characters we created. In fact, we didn't even get started on him until well after the others were done, so he took a long time to finish. Even then, they went through dozens of different concepts for Remy, with the basis of his design being a bouquet character, as revealed in a Capcom Secret File roundtable interview with Third Strike developers Hidetoshi Ishizawa, Tomonori Onuma, Yasunori Ichinose, and Haruo Murata. Next is Remy. His image somehow feels un-Capcom. He wasn't there in the beginning of the development. The design for Remy started not from our game design team, but from the character designer. His concept was for a delicate bouquet type. He came up with 40 to 50 different designs, didn't he? There were a lot, yeah. There was the bouquet doctor, the bouquet priest, the bouquet prince, bouquet monster. The bouquet priest was one of the final contenders, I remember. It's clear that Remy's development was a tumultuous one, with it taking around 50 different concepts before finalising his design. And even then, the design they ended up going with had numerous similarities to SNK's Iori Yagami, an insanely popular character from the King of Fighters series. From their slender frame to their red pants, the two characters bore a striking resemblance and are often compared even today. Thus we get to the biggest complaint against Remy. He just didn't feel like a Street Fighter character. Even Capcom thought the design was unlike them, and they're the ones who made it. Then we get to Remy's very edgy personality. I'm not usually one to devolve a character with personal and emotional issues into a derogatory emo trope, but in the case of Remy, he's pretty damn emo. Some of his dialogue and his intros and outros are, well, just take a listen.
さあ、断罪の時間だ。何なんだ、あんた。何もかも憎いんだよ。
I feel like it's worth mentioning that a lot of the hate for Remy seems to come well after Third Strike's release. Back in 1999, Remy seemed like a character that sat in the middle of popularity polls. In this horrific image showing character rankings from a Japanese and American Third Strike location test, Remy ranked 7th in the US and 14th in Japan, so this isn't a case of Western fans rejecting the tropey emo pretty boy. So what happened? It's hard to say when exactly the hate and disregarding of Remy truly began, but by the release of Street Fighter 4, nearly 10 years after Third Strike came out, it clearly wasn't even in the minds of the current Capcom development team or the fans. While the Street Fighter 3 representation in general was weak with Street Fighter 4's initial release, by the end of the game's life it had picked up considerably, with many characters returning and others referenced or alluded to. Yet Remy was just nowhere to be seen, and quite frankly no one really wanted him to be seen or heard from. In a poll taken by Capcom in 2013, Remy ranked 44th worldwide out of 67 characters, which, while above some Street Fighter 3 characters, was still far below the others that had made it into Street Fighter 4 by that point. By the time of Street Fighter 5 Arcade Edition's release, another character poll ranked him 41st out of 109th, but the validity of this poll is questionable due to it essentially being used as a glorified character request for Street Fighter 5, as well as reports of people hacking votes. So, from the fans' perspective, Remy is a character that rests in ambivalence. No one really wants him back, but he's not someone that the fanbase actively loathes, like say Rufus. What about Capcom then? Well, when you look at Street Fighter 5's placement in the timeline as a bridge between Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 3, it's extremely telling that Remy is the only Street Fighter 3 character that doesn't have a cameo and isn't referenced or alluded to. Yeah, that's right, even 12 got foreshadowed in Street Fighter 5, yet Remy didn't. In fact, Remy's only appearance in Street Fighter 5 is this tiny background shot from Poison's ending in the Street Fighter 3 arcade ladder. That's it! Remy also happens to be the only Street Fighter character to have never been featured in a single issue of Udon's Street Fighter comic series. Not even a cameo, not even a background shot. Think about that for a minute. Out of every Street Fighter character in the entire series, he was the singular one that Udon never felt the desire to use, not even once. It is very obvious that Capcom currently have no plans for Remy when it comes to the present and the future of the Street Fighter series, and I think that's a real shame. It's only just now that I remember that this is a video that's meant to defend Remy, but unlike my previous video on Sean, I feel like that a lot of the feedback and treatment surrounding Remy is fairly justified. That being said, over the years I've come to appreciate Remy for the weird character that he is. Remy undeniably stands out from the rest of the Street Fighter universe, though arguably not in a good way, but I think his uniqueness actually benefits him. However, in a roster as varied and unique as Third Strike's, Remy admittedly does fall by the wayside a bit. With this and the issues with his moveset being neutered by the parry system, I feel like Remy is a character that would actually hugely benefit from appearing in another Street Fighter game. Without the parry system, Remy becomes viable from a gameplay perspective, and in a roster with characters and designs that range across the whole series, Remy could actually really have a chance to stand out without being overshadowed by the more eccentric Third Strike designs. Then we get to his story and character, and like I said earlier, aspects of Remy's backstory are unquestionably poorly written, and I can't defend them without insulting the intelligence of whoever watches this. However, what I can do is explain how with a simple rewrite that Capcom themselves made, we can fix the issues with Remy's motivations while still keeping his backstory intact. And to do this, we need to look at an unlikely source. Teppen is a 2019 collectible card game developed by Gung Ho Online Entertainment and Capcom. So why are we looking at Teppen? Well, numerous cards available for players to collect and use are based on dozens of characters from Capcom's huge library of games. One of these cards features Remy and is accompanied by a small piece of flavor text that, while brief, rewords Remy's motivations in a way that I think makes more sense. What the hell's wrong with you? Those who seek revenge should not find such pleasure in battle. Is that what it means to be a warrior? Though this might seem like a pretty minor bit of text, it actually recontextualizes Remy's entire motivation. Instead of Remy's character being based around I hate people that fight so I'm going to stop them from fighting by fighting, it now becomes I hate warriors who gain pleasure from the battles and I'm seeking revenge against one who personally wronged me and my family. Instead of becoming a fighter that hates fighters, Remy is now a fighter that seeks to punish warriors, seeing them as scum who use excuses of revenge and pride to fuel their desires at the expense of hurting their loved ones. This lines up naturally with Remy's backstory of his father leaving him and his sister before her untimely death. This reworded backstory now also allows a deeper look into Remy himself, who's actually an incredibly tragic character that masks his pain with an intense hatred of his father, which leads to him using other fighters and warriors as scapegoats for his rage and sadness. Remy's motivations are justified, but his methods are confusing at best and utterly hypocritical at worst. The reason for this is because Remy deep down is confused. He doesn't know what he wants. Does he kill his father, or does he move on with his life? Does he let go of his sister, or accept her death and start living for himself? Remy doesn't know what he wants. He's too hurt and scarred by the tragic events of his youth to figure it out. Who knows what Remy would do if he were to ever meet his father? I doubt Remy himself would even know, but it's easier for him to blame any fighter he comes across, rather than deal with his pain in a more rational and less sanctimonious way. It's easier for him to cling to his sister's corpse, the last shred of the only person in his life who truly cared for him, than come to terms with her death and move on. Combine this deep uncertainty with another aspect to Remy that is relatively forgotten about, his choice to leave the fighters he defeats to be arrested by the police. This shows that Remy has an incredibly self-righteous view of the world that fuels his own desire of revenge and justice, which he fails to realise is the same desire many of his supposed enemies feel. To put it simply, Remy is a massive hypocrite who has no idea what he wants for his life. His entire journey in Third Strike leads to him realising the error of his ways and how his own quest for revenge has blinded him to his own hypocrisy. Remy choosing to move on from his current path by letting go of his sister's body is a huge moment for him and shows that he is willing to move on and grow as a person. The Remy we see at the end of his Third Strike ending is an entirely different person, and I hope that one day we can fully see who this new Remy is. At the end of the day, I can't justify the Remy we get in Third Strike. He's a hugely flawed character, which is why I think I find him so interesting. It's just a shame that a messy development of his character led to such a disjointed final product. Remy deserves another chance in my opinion, and I just hope that Capcom and the fanbase are open to giving him that chance, instead of leaving him as the broken character he's been left as for the last 23 years. Will we ever get that chance though? It's tough to say. The years of absence have been kinder to some characters than others, and Remy still seems to fall into the latter. As I said earlier, it's not so much that people hate Remy, it's that they just don't care about him, and that matters a lot when it comes to choosing who comes back and who doesn't. But the future of Street Fighter is shaping up to be mighty interesting. We finally had our first look at Street Fighter 6, and it seems to be taking the series in a more realistic direction, while hopefully taking the series past Street Fighter 3 in the timeline. To me, these are two factors that I think could benefit Remy a lot. He'd clearly be a much different person in the game set post Third Strike, and a more realistic art style could help blend him in with the rest of the cast a lot better. Time will tell if Street Fighter 6 will give us the possible redemption of Remy, but until then, we'll have to settle with this deeply flawed yet deeply intriguing character for even longer.
Everybody got to beat it, it's time you hung it up.
We await your return, warrior.